McCracken Poston Jr. is a practicing criminal defense attorney and former state legislator in the Georgia House of Representatives. He is a graduate of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga and received his law degree from the University of Georgia. He gained national attention for his handling of several notable cases that were featured on CNN Presents, Dateline, NBC, A&E's, American Justice, and Forensic Files. He lives in Ringgold, Georgia. Savor Gray will be interviewing Kraken today, and she has a master's degree in Florida Studies. She is a teacher of writing at UNF, and she is a true crime fan. And fun fact, she lived outside of Chattanooga at the same time McCracken was working on this case, but she was in sixth grade, so not too young to be paying attention. But Savor, I leave the rest to you.
Right, thank you very much. So, hello, McCracken.
Hello, how are you doing? I've been really looking forward to this, and thank you to the system, the library, for having this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So, given your involvement in various high-profile cases, what inspired you to write about the Ridley case specifically, and why choose this moment for its release?
Well, those of you who have written will know that the publisher decides when it's going to be released. When I finally got around to a 25-year effort of getting it to page, they decided that when I signed the contract with Kensington, which has printed it under the Citadel imprint, I looked at it and it said publication date February 20, 2024. And this was like May of 2022.
Oh.
And I was really kind of disappointed. I thought, I got to wait that long, but I didn't think I've got to write this thing, which is really what took up a good bit of time. So my May of 2022 was the contract. My actual manuscript due date was March 1st of 2023. And that zoomed forward. I just dove into writing it because I had been saving anecdotal scenes that I'd just been writing and hoping that one day I would have a thread that connected them all together other than the course of the trial itself. And I didn't realize that the thing that finally made it gel didn't happen until the year 2021. And that was the diagnosis of Alvin Ridley as being on the autism spectrum. That was like a slap in the face of, wow, I should have seen that. I should have known that. But 25 years ago, nobody was talking about autism in adults. The spectrum had just been kind of put forward, and they were only talking about it in children, and they were focusing on finding a blame for it. When autism has been with us since the dawn of time, and some of our greatest contributors to the arts and to science and to have been on the spectrum. And, you know, it is a spectrum. There are various degrees of functioning with the neurotypical world. And Alvin Ridley was, you know, he was a hell of a TV repairman for all those years, but it was in the old picture tube technology. So around the same time that all of these ills began to befall him, really what was also happening was the transition to solid state circuitry.
Okay, so he's losing his relevance as far as...
Yeah, and he felt like everybody's not doing business with me anymore. He will admit now, nobody wants a TV repairman anymore. You just throw them away. Exactly. And, you know, giant big screens, thin screens, there's no picture tubes inside, nothing for Alvin to work on.
Yeah.
But in his mind, in the early 80s, it was everybody's out to get me. They're shutting my business down. They took my van. That was the
Yes, he was obsessed with that. I love that it just sat there in the front.
It's still there. It's still there. It
there.
now has trees growing up around it.
Yeah,
To move it would require a chainsaw now.
that's great.
It's funny. One of the city council called me after our big event last week, and that the van is such a big part of his story that he started asking me questions, and I thought, am I in trouble? Am I going to get Alvin cited by the city for a junk car? And he said, I said, should I be talking to you about this? And he goes, oh no, we want to make it a tourist destination. So we're hoping we have some true crime tourism in our little town because of this book.
Yeah, get the payphone.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't know how many, I can't tell how many people are here. Can y'all? 26. Okay. I want to introduce myself. I'm the lawyer for an autistic man who I did not know was autistic. He was accused of horrible things in terms of keeping his wife in the basement of their home for 27 years before killing her and away from seeing anyone else. And so that's where I started on this case. Where it ended now is a book about my representation of a man who has autism and how that autism and its traits were actually used against him by the state of Georgia. And now, I feel a lot of guilt actually about some of our conflict, and that I didn't realize that he could not help being the way he was. And I expressed that in the book because, but Alvin has a way of just getting the best of me time and time again.
That certainly comes through. Yeah. I loved how you were concerned that when you were choosing the jury members, and you were worried about finding people who would be fair towards him, but it turns out that most of them who had any problems, they had problems with you.
Yeah, they didn't like my politics, and
Yeah.
that was clear after my last election. But I also think when you're representing a person that's charged with bad things, the minute the prosecutor reads those charges, you can feel the jury, and this will help any of you who are writing courtroom scenes. When those charges get read to the panels of jurors that you're going to be picking from, you can sense the cold taking over that room and the withdrawal of smiles and nods, and suddenly it's on, and people are very uncomfortable by the allegations of the case. And so, I still contend that maybe that lady, the scowling lady, she may just not have wanted to be on that case. But her excuse was she didn't like me. And I did not take it well at first, but
Yeah,
got used to it.
if I recall, you were very insistent on, well, why is this?
Yeah. Name one thing I did.
Yeah, name one thing.
The judge called me down on that.
So, what moments in the Ridley case did you find most crucial to capture, and which were the most difficult to write?
Well, first, for a 90,000 word contract for this book, I just poured it out. And I had 177,000 words.
Oh, wow.
And that was horrible. But I really recommend it to get it all out.
Yes.
And I wrote in a chronological style because that makes the most sense to me about a criminal case. The only thing that's not chronological is the foreword.
Mhm.
And that was suggested that I write one by my publisher because they wanted to hook the reader. And instead of talking about my miserable night in 1996, where I lost a congressional race, filed a divorce, and lost a presidential appointment within like a 6-week period. So it was, they just thought, let's start on another tone. So I started with Alvin on the day of his wife's death.
Mhm.
So, it was, it was a process that I was very involved in. What I did not anticipate was how much of my own life I was going to pour into this book. That surprised me.
Really?
But that ended up, my first place, I know a lot of you are writers, and I want to tell you that I was not a writer, but I just wrote little things on social media, little stories. And I got a lot of compliments by people who said, you should write something, you should write this. And so I really just did not have the confidence. And so over the years, after that jury came back and acquitted my client, I would give this story away. I would give it to anybody. And I did give it to everybody. Forensic Files on TV. Many of you have seen this episode
I was very familiar with it.
about the reclusive TV repairman and his wife nobody had seen in 3 decades. And American Justice, same story. NPR Snap Judgment, same story. People Magazine, same story. I just gave it away. And my agent actually thought, that may be a problem with a publisher, that this story's been told too much. But the new thing was Alvin's autism diagnosis. And that really formed the book in my head. And finally, I had the confidence to write it. But I just poured it all out. I ended up with 177,000 words. And then I had to start. It's just like deciding which ones of your children are going to survive.
Oh, I'm
and,
sure.
And which ones are the weak ones that you have to put outside in the cold.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible way to say that, but
Well, no, I mean, Sophie's choice,
but but they're very personal to you.
Of course.
Yeah. And so I got it down to like 110,000. 105,000. I was hacking away. I got it down to about 103,000. And I just said to the editor, I can't cut another word. If it blows the contract, so be it. But I just can't, in good conscience, take away any more from this. And she said, okay. And I was shocked.
How long ago could I have said this? And you
yeah, exactly. So there was some play there in how many words. Now, that being said, during the copy editing process, where probably about 4 different copy editors were involved, and it was a fun process. Believe it or not, I enjoyed it because I had the confidence of these experts who were telling me, that's not the way to say that. That may be how you say it in Northwest Georgia, but that's not how you say it in English. And so I was like, oh, okay, but there was some of the ghosts lingered in my manuscript. And there was a paragraph about some chickens. And my editor said, that's interesting. Where did that come from? And I said, you made me hack it away. That's just something I forgot. Yeah. And so she convinced me that I didn't need 4 pages to tell that story, that I could add maybe a couple of paragraphs that brought it all around. So brevity is key. And did I lose your audio?
Mine?
Oh, no, you're there.
Oh, I'm here. I'm just listening. Sorry.
Brevity is key. And so I got to rebuild a few things once I learned that I could do that.
Yeah.
And so I got to plug in, I don't know what the final word count is, but it's 320 pages. And I don't know how much of that is acknowledgments and epilogue and stuff like that. But, and I don't even know if I answered your question now because I forgot what your original question was.
Oh, just basically like, so before you really sat down and thought, okay, all right, let's do this.
I went to 4 people and said, help me write this book.
Help me. Yeah.
And over the years, I just thought, I will co-write this with people. I will tell it to them and they will help me put it in a coherent story. And I just lacked the confidence.
Mhm.
And there were wonderful people. I was fortunate to know, and you may see a blurb on my book from Rory Kennedy, who is the daughter of Bobby Kennedy, the presidential candidate who was assassinated in Los Angeles while she was in her mother's womb standing next to him. Her office reached out to me about another case. She was doing a film called American Hollow. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it was about an Appalachian family up in Kentucky. And apparently my client I was forced to try two murder cases back to back. One was Joe Canada and the other one was Alvin Ridley. So the Joe Canada case, he was kind of a bad guy in her documentary. And now he's in Georgia being tried for murder and being convicted for murder. And her office is calling me to ask questions. I thought, wow, Rory Kennedy's trying to call me. She didn't realize her office had been calling me. I started calling her back. And she thought, oh no, Joe Canada's lawyer's trying to reach me. Hurry up, wrap this thing up and let's get it in the can and then I'll call him back. She finally called me back and, knew that I was a friendly. And she said, my husband would really like to talk to you. He's a screenwriter. So we actually had a film deal with New Line Cinema 20 years ago based on Mark Bailey's screenplay, which I never read. And I retained literary rights with New Line so that I could just say, here's the book. You do whatever you want to, Hollywood, but I will stand by the book. And that way, we can all be happy. Yeah. And so we had that deal. They held the rights for 5 years. And that kind of kept me from, it gave me the excuse not to write for a long time because I was going to let that get started.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I tried with one after another writer, and these were good writers. And one in his proposal, he just wasn't from the South. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing against him, but it just was not at all from the South. He even referenced some Native American tribe leader from up north somewhere. And I thought, nobody will get that here. And so I guess I was kind of writing for my community because it involves so many of them.
Yeah.
And so finally, Alvin's diagnosis made me realize, I think I can write this. I still had questions until I found a developmental editor, because the publishing industry, it has some quirky rules and weird traditions. And Bonnie Hearn Hill is the best teacher, mentor ever. And I recommend you all reach out to her.
Bonnie Hearn Hill.
Bonnie Hearn Hill. She lives in Fresno, California. She taught me so much, but she also gave me a gift. She had seen my fits and starts because I sent it to her and I said, can you help me? Is there anything here? And she said, you can write. She said, you can write, but she said, you also have to show how this affected you. That was not what I was expecting. And as I started looking, I found my late mother's journals. And I thought, I remember taking Alvin to my parents' house back during the heat of everything because my father was always so kind to him and he really liked my father. And then I started realizing, well, wait a minute. I first told my father about this when we put him in the hospital for his alcoholism, the first time we ever really addressed it. And then I thought, do I really want to go there in such a deeply personal thing in this book? But it became really important to the story because my father encouraged me to help Alvin when he sobered up. And and Alvin was very you'd think at first that he was simple, but he really wasn't. But he thought a lot of my father as well. So, adult child of alcoholic parent. I am a wreck. I am a micromanager. I've always had problems with relationships. It's just, it sticks with you. So suddenly I had to address all these things. And within 90,000 words. and so I just kind of skimmed over a lot of it and hacked away a lot of it. But it was an important part of the story.
Absolutely. You can see the thread throughout. You get him hospitalized for treatment successfully, right as this is all beginning. And with the Thanksgiving plate that you're able to bring to Alvin, that finally lets him in his house, lets you in his house. He manages to make it. I think it was the last day of the trial that your father.
No, it was about midway.
It was midway.
It was after we changed courtrooms because of the roach infestation of the first courtroom.
I can't believe that. That is shocking.
That's confirmed on the Forensic Files episode.
Yeah.
The juror is saying there are roaches coming out of those suitcases, and
day after day too.
we just infested the hell out of that courtroom, and I hate that courtroom. It's a tiny windowless box built in 1982. The infestation allowed us to move into the 1939 courthouse that was built in 1939, a WPA project, and it's a beautiful, big courtroom. But more interestingly, it was the last place Virginia Ridley had ever been seen in public, September 15, 1970. And I really felt like she was in that room. And I'm not a ghost guy. I'm not one of those guys that sees a ghost around every corner, but I was feeling her presence there.
Really?
And I just thought, this woman is acquitting her husband by the writings that her
hypergraphia,
her physical condition was compelling her to write. And those writings are saving her husband because she addressed every issue and why she didn't get out, why she didn't like her family anymore. Every question that was raised, her writings answered.
Yeah, it's really interesting how even though in many ways it seems like you and Alvin are very separate people. At the beginning in the prologue, when Alvin is introduced making the 911 call, and you're introduced in the third person too, which I thought was interesting. You're both presented as men at low points in your lives.
We were.
Yeah, I think
I was at a very low point in my life.
Yeah, you describe yourself as an extremely hungover, failed politician, failed husband, and marginally failing lawyer.
Well, and blindly, and I have a bunch of friends I grew up with that our fathers all were World War II, era veterans who just had problems with alcohol. And here are all their sons following that path. That was our role model.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, whatever the switch that often flips that would have just given me, a lifetime of problems. I would binge drink for a long time, and then I would get on the wagon for a long time. It's just my health, my development of type 1 diabetes also kind of mitigated toward not drinking so much.
Yeah.
and yeah, so it but this was something that I think was just, it's what I thought men did.
Mm-hmm.
And so the writing of this really helped me put that in perspective. It also made me identify, and I do not try to compare my childhood with people who had horrific alcoholic parents. I had a sweet, loving alcoholic father.
You're careful to point that out.
He just was very pitiful. His career at a foundry in Chattanooga got the best of him, and we got the tired, three sheets to the wind version of him at the end of the day. And with that comes an enabling sweet mother and 5 older sisters that we all plot out in different parts of the graph on how it affected us.
Yeah.
And so, I really had to deal with that. But once I opened the can, I thought, I can't not write this. So, to thread the needle and write about our parents when I have 5 sisters and then 2 ex-wives, that is threading the needle. And I all gave them arcs for the book and just kind of held my breath.
Yeah, I mean, you're extremely gracious towards, everybody, every character. I was really impressed, even if you might be slightly critical of them during the narrative, in the epilogue, you redeemed them in many ways.
Well, my favorite is my former opponent, my last opponent, the congressman. He inspired me by calling me and ordering me to keep my client away from his congressional office. That gave me a motivation. And I mean, he really
renewed purpose.
But yeah, it totally renewed purpose, because now it was a game. And now it was a campaign again. And now, out of spite, I was going to represent Alvin Ridley.
And I love at the end you said, I can't remember is this Nathan Deal?
Yeah. And he later was our governor, and he later did some wonderful things for convicted felons, which
and that's what ultimately convinced you not to give Alvin his address.
Now that was in my wheelhouse. And I thought, this guy actually did some great things that really only he could do. I was a Democrat. He was a Democrat. Then he switched right before the big red wave came up to Georgia. And I always worked with my Republican friends, but I did note that when all the change started happening, people were expecting a lot of change, but so many people just simply changed parties that the faces were all the same.
Yeah.
It's just it's silly.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
So back to how Alvin's introduced and how you introduce yourself in the prologue, and using that third person, and both of you kind of at very low points. And even though Zenith Man was a nickname given to Alvin by the community, it almost seems that it would have been still appropriate to perhaps have called the book Zenith Men.
You're the first person, and when young people don't know what Zenith is.
Oh, really?
And if there are any in the room, it was a television brand. It was an electronics giant, first with radios. My grandmother inherited an old 1939 Zenith radio from my grandmother, but it was also a television brand. And Alvin swore by it and was a hell of a good TV repairman for it. But it also, of course, its original meaning is like the apex or the apogee, or
the height of the sun, literally.
The height, the height of things. And I also thought how good. There's a lot of redemption in this book.
Oh yeah.
It's Alvin is redeemed in the community. I feel redeemed from all the things I was going through. My father is redeemed.
Yes.
By becoming sober for the most part for the last 10 years of his life. Congressman, later Governor Nathan Deal is redeemed. And I will say this, the coroner, Benita Hollander.
Yes.
Last Christmas, her house guest for Christmas meal was Alvin Ridley.
No way.
Now that is a continuing redemption.
Yeah, that's incredible.
The fact that a book was about to come out about this might have influenced that, but hey, we'll take it.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll take it. And she's very sincere. I told Alvin, and many of you have an autistic person that you love in your life. And the proudest I am about this book is when people are commenting, I have an autistic adult child. And I could have told you Alvin had autism, years before. But of course, we're reviewing a past. So not people just weren't talking about it in adults.
Sure.
But they very often were called the eccentric in your town. They were not quite interacting with the rest of the people. I actually think that it's a two-way processing issue. Alvin could not process the way I spoke because I don't always speak literally. And so Alvin probably was confused by the way the investigators were grilling him and how I was grilling him. And at the same time, I was not processing Alvin very well. I was not prepared or with the skill set to process or decipher and interpret Alvin Ridley. So it was a two-way street, really.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to watch the development and transformation of your friendship with him, or your relationship with him from a attorney-client into a genuine kind of friendship. And so between encountering Alvin on the is it Nashville Street?
Oh, the first encounters. Well,
yeah, on election night.
Election night is Nashville Street. He was guarding his building because there was activity downtown, and Ringgold usually rolls its sidewalks up at night. And suddenly there's like after midnight activity going up 3 doors up, and it's my campaign, my failed campaign.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was the only one left in town. I sent everybody home and went out in the middle of the street and called my soon-to-be ex-wife and told her I'll file the papers tomorrow. And I was kind of surprised. There's Alvin. And I thought, oh, please let me get out of here. Is that a gun he has? And he always thought people were trying to break into get his dilapidated old water-soaked TV sets. There was a hole in the roof of his building.
Yeah.
And just before the trial, we were inside and it was snowing on us. And, no heat, the floor wet with the last several rains. It was just a really bad, tough place. And he was in a tough place. He was just kind of.
I mean, that was his identity. He wanted that on his tombstone,
He was
TV
lost.
repairman.
He was lost without Virginia.
Yeah.
And I could tell he was grieving still.
I believe you wrote in there that she was perhaps his truest or only friend at the time.
Yeah, but I forgot how literal he was. And so in the trial, when Jesus told him to testify against my advice, and in Georgia, or I think in most states, that is the client's call. Okay. I could decide which witnesses to use, which theories to go after. That is attorney choice. But whether you testify or not is always the client choice.
Okay.
When Jesus weighed in on it, then it was done. So who am I to counter that? But so I got ahead of myself because Alvin was doing so well. Now, granted, I was letting Alvin be Alvin. I was letting him talk about the van. I was letting him talk about all the ills for over the years. But the DA also was bringing all that stuff up. And I think he was bringing it up to show the jury, look how ridiculous this guy is and how litigious he is and how frivolous he is with this litigation. But Alvin had made me study all that stuff. So in a weird way, he prepared me.
Yes.
And so we're doing very well. And I get ahead of myself and I decide I want to finish strong. Alvin, what have you lost here? And I wanted him to say, my best friend or the love of my life. And he goes, oh, the funeral bill. Oh my God. And the DA tore us apart in his closing. Listen how cold and heartless this guy is. All he's worried about is the funeral bill. That's all he's lost. It was awful.
There's still,
but classic autism.
yeah,
To
exactly.
answer it in a
Yeah, the
very
literal.
flat, the three things about autism that were actually used against Alvin at trial. One was his flat vocal effect when he was calling 911. Second was their feeling that his emotions were not meeting the moment.
Yes.
You just lost your wife. He's just as cool as a cucumber. And then, of course, another paramedic said, well, then he just broke down and he was inconsolable. And then he was fine the next minute. And that's classic autism. The fact that he maintained grudges from childhood and grudges against children who used to taunt him. Well, that's just the nature of a child. Here's this guy that's he'll banter back and forth with you. And these kids, the pharmacist kids, they would just, get in his face and give it back to him. Well, Alvin would run home and tell Virginia, and she would write these long stories about those gas boys and, how they were tormenting Alvin. Well, they were children.
Yeah.
But sadly, they all grew up to be responsible people in the community. One, the fire chief, which is why Alvin would not stop by that fire department.
Yeah, drove right past.
Drove right past it. The other one was the arresting officer, which made it even worse.
Yeah.
Good guy, great guy. He is our magistrate judge now.
Yeah,
and
you talk about him in the epilogue. Yeah,
and a great judge. And so what I'm very pleased about is the diagnosis for Alvin. It almost let him let go of a lot of things, because I think people genuinely warmed up to him. No longer were they fearful of this blank stare that he would give. They understood it better. And and quite frankly, I think we all know somebody with autism now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so we can relate.
It gives you a framework it gives you a kind of almost a language to understand, what's happening there.
Exactly.
Like, oh, I can interpret this as that because I know it's, of this other thing. Yeah, it's that you took him to that specialist, I think is fantastic. Right? It was you were the one who took him.
Yeah, it was a juror from the case that suggested it. She told a podcaster out of UT Chattanooga to ask me, did I ever consider it? And it was like splashing cold water in my face. I just thought, well, of course, that's probably it. So I found a doctor in Atlanta that deals with adults. And, while I was present, she asked Alvin to react to a couple of phrases. And one was, she's gotten under your skin. Well, he looked physically uncomfortable with the notion that somebody could get under your skin.
Yeah.
And then he wears his heart on his sleeve. Alvin said, he has an artificial heart. And I have an insulin pump. So I've always joked that it's my pancreas in my pocket. And so Alvin thought, I've got one on you. That guy has his heart on his sleeve, his artificial heart. So she told me those were early indications, and then further testing indicated that he's truly deep in the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
But he's happier now. He's so much happier now.
Yeah. And there's so many endearing moments, like when they like me, Alvin's "they like me" status. I thought that was the cutest thing in the world.
That was our whole jury selection strategy.
Yeah.
And then of course it had to be, do they not like me?
Yeah.
The Alvin insisted on this neck brace.
Yes.
And it was awful. It was like this, I called it the stench radiator. And he forgot it, and he threatened to leave court, which he was apt to do. Just get up and leave court. And so I had my secretary run and get a new one. And I thought, well, at least it'll be a new one. But I'm putting it on him as the jurors are coming in the room. So I look like the biggest sham lawyer trying to get sympathy. Here, put this neck brace on, client. Isn't this a car wreck case?
Yeah.
to pivot on such a humorous note, we're gonna open it up to our audience questions, and I see we already have a couple. But
All
just I
right.
wanted to say thank you for such a great conversation, to both of you, and for all of our audience. If you do have a question, but you haven't gotten into the Q&A chat, please do so now, and Saber will go ahead and ask them. And I'm very excited to hear more of the responses.
Okay.
McCracken, can you see these as well?
I actually can.
Okay, all right.
But why don't you read them so I can?
All right. Did you emotionally identify with your client before learning about his diagnosis of autism?
I would say so, because we like fought a war together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's like a guy that I had to figure out how to work with. And you just can't help but feel endearment to him.
Yeah.
But when he's putting you through so much hell, and I, like when we would walk through town, he would always walk behind me. And if Salesman Sam was with us, he would walk behind Alvin. So we looked like some kind of crazy circus train.
Yeah.
And here I had fallen from, I shared a stage with Bill Clinton when he was running for president in Atlanta, and I was, I walked with kings, so to speak, and now I'm walking with Alvin Ridley and Salesman Sam.
And filing his emotions.
And he was filing his emotions to counter my motions because he didn't think I was doing a great job. He constantly challenged me for not knocking his case out, is how he called it. Like I could just go magically do that. So I would say, yes, I did emotionally identify with Alvin slowly. I was furious with him at first. He would scream at me. There was the moment that I said, "Oh Lord," because he started talking about his van, and he thought I was praying, and he got really quiet and closed his eyes, and I ran with it. From then on, if he started screaming, we were going to pray my legal advice to him. And it would get pretty evangelistic sometimes, but especially when I would ask to be let in his house, please, Lord, Alvin would say, "I'll think about it." That's how he would always end it. When I decided to get a phone installed in his house, and I was going to use that excuse to go in with the phone guy and finally see the inside of his house, and Alvin figured me out, and he had the phone installed on the porch.
Oh, you left that out of the book.
I don't know. I thought I put it in there, but it may have been part of the. It could have been part of the 77,000 word
well, I do remember
massacre.
He leaves the phone off the hook at some point, and when you're trying to get a hold of him over and over again, and you're like, Alvin, your phone's off the hook. And he's like, what? And you're like, look at the phone, it's off the hook.
Yeah, he said, no, it's not. And I'm like, there it is, laying on the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, classic.
So let's see, another question. I was wondering if you happen to know an old family friend, Franklin Horn, who was a lawyer and was a Georgia politician in the 70s and 80s. He's from Macon and was our neighbor.
Oh, wow.
Another neighbor of mine when I lived in Athens, Carter Brank, was in charge of the GBI office in Atlanta in the 90s. My dad and uncle were law enforcement. Lots of I got connections, I guess, to the area.
Oh, wow. Those names are all familiar. But I came along to the state legislature at age 28 in 1988. And so I was part of a new breed of young legislators. I got sick with diabetes, insulin-dependent diabetes while I was there. It changed my perspective. I realized that the old tradition of waiting in the wings for 20 years and then hoping that the speaker would dub you as the House's candidate for governor, that was not going to happen anymore. And so I began to be kind of a Molotov cocktail throwing reformer, and which is one of the reasons nobody wanted me to be appointed to be a federal prosecutor because I was affected by that diagnosis, and it kind of burned some bridges with some people. So
Yeah, they were at that committee was asking whether or not, as someone with diabetes, if you would be able to handle the rigors of, the job and things like that. And but it's just so interesting to see the prejudice that they are displaying towards you. And the same thing, Alvin experiences that as well, although they didn't have a name for it, right?
Yeah, I felt like I belonged. One of the judges in town, jokingly but with concern, told me, folks are saying you two deserve each other,
Mm.
Alvin and I. And, maybe we did. It just was, there's a lot of pressure not to do your best for somebody like Alvin. There's a lot of feeling that I was going a little too far out on a limb for him. Somebody asked, any advice on the path to publication? I'm in a similar-ish vein. He's working on something about lethal injection. Keeps hearing that writing is great, but need a 4 to 5 figure following before they can commit. Now, I hope, does that mean social media following? I don't understand what the 4 to 5 figure following.
That's how I'm interpreting it, but I'm not entirely sure.
My situation with social media was definitely helped by the fact that I was in politics and still had all those connections, and I don't think it's vital though. I think if you'll go back and Allison's going to give you all my links, but if you go back to my early Twitter, I did not know what in the hell I was doing. I literally started storyboarding my book. And when I didn't have pictures, I drew.
Yay!
And so I made artist renderings of some of these crazy stories, Alvin's cats, the fact that he, escaped from court several times.
Spider bite.
The big ass spider bite. All those things I just drew. And it kind of kept my mind busy, but it also, people were starting to say, hey, this is kind of funny. I can't believe these stories, you should write a book. And I'm going like, that's the point.
Yeah.
So I don't think you could do that on lethal injection necessarily, but I don't think it's necessary that you need that kind of figure. I just think your story should be what leads, and lead with your story.
Perhaps it depends on the audience that you're trying to target. Maybe if it's a younger audience or something, then perhaps followers would be more. I'm not sure, or maybe certain publishers are more interested in looking at that.
Anthony, if I'd be happy. I'm easy to find, postonlaw@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions after the fact, all of you. Sean McCormick says, I'm about halfway through the book. I'm loving it. The Alvin odor seems to be a prominent feature of the experience. Was it that bad? Well, part of Alvin's autism means that he does not like the feel of water on his skin. And so I've never known Alvin to bathe. The VA nurses made him take a bath before they gave him his cataract surgery a couple of years back. And we all cheered. But he just doesn't like to bathe. And I'll buy him new clothes. He will wear them day and night until they fall off, and I buy him more clothes. But the cover photo is a photo booth. That's Alvin and Virginia at a little amusement park in Catoosa County, Georgia, called Lake Winnipesaukee. And we all remember Lake Winnie. You probably went there, didn't you, Saber?
Lake Winnipesaukee is
yeah, exactly. And that was an old photo booth, and there was a strip of photos, and that was one of them. I, of course, this is what we all do. We envision everything about our book, including our cover. And I had a piece of folk art by the Reverend Howard Finster of Alvin Ridley. Howard Finster loved the case, and he did a painting, which I put inside the book because my publisher said, look, we control everything outside of the book because we know how to sell books. they grabbed that photo and they all loved it. And I love it now because I get it now. A folk art picture of Alvin in his neck brace, that probably would not have had the same appeal.
Yeah.
So,
And it
but
doesn't
that's,
look much like him either, right?
it looks like a bodice ripper. I mean, it looks like if he just had Fabio hair and her blouse was being ripped open, that would be quite a hot photo.
Yeah.
And just so you'll know, when you look at the pictures, Virginia was 18. She looks like 12
She looks
in
even
these
younger.
pictures.
She looks like a
Yeah.
little kid. Yeah.
She was a tiny, tiny woman. What was my writing process for this book? It was just like projectile vomiting. Everything went in. How much did I draw from my notes of the time? I kept very good notes, and I kept everything in the files. I even had Alvin's notes. And
Oh, God.
and I had my notes on Alvin's notes. Stop jingling your change in your pocket.
I loved how you were constantly making comments to him.
Stop writing so hard, because the jurors were watching him.
I know, he seemed
And
like such a distraction.
he was a total distraction, which came in handy sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially when the state's case was going on. But I just poured in, and I had great jury notes, which allowed me to revisit the jury process. And I had the order in which they were picked and presented. Okay, what do you think are the pros and cons to the attention a case can get from being featured in all these things? And this is the greatest example of that. We were on everything because I was just telling the story to anybody who would listen.
Mhm.
And it had all the things, the same reason the National Examiner loved the story. Sicko holds wife captive for 30 years, then kills her. It's just kind of something that we are a sick society. We love those stories, and we want to hear these depraved
The
stories.
extremes of human behavior, right?
Yeah, we want to hear it. So that's why it got so much play. And then, of course, it became a wrongful accusation story, which also is somewhat popular. But my agent was concerned this story may be told too much. A publisher may say, no, we'll pass. It's kind of old. It's been told a lot. But there was a new element, and that was Alvin's autism.
Mhm.
And I didn't plan it that way. I was just always struggling, always trying to find somebody to, write it with me. But thanks to Bonnie, and again, write her name down, Bonnie Hearn Hill, in Fresno, California. And she is wonderful. She's very generous to give you advice. But there's some weird little quirks in the publishing industry. For example, and Bonnie was training me, and I would resist some of it. Like, you need to close every email with the word best. That is like a code. That's like a code in
It
publishing.
exists
Like,
in various disciplines and circles. Yeah.
it's like a code in publishing, like, you're one of us. You say best at the end. Well, I don't say best at the end. I say sincerely or thanks or something like that. But I've started realizing that's the code that, they know how to act. I also was like really mad when a bookstore in Nashville didn't want to let me do an appearance there. And my publisher's office, they said, look, you don't want to burn bridges with them. Just make them wish they had. And, and that's kind of what I'm doing, even tonight, just spreading the gospel.
Yeah.
These are good questions. Had there been cases like this before where undiagnosed autistic people have been falsely accused? I am certain there have been.
There's oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, mainly just because it's just the classic setup for
Yeah, with false
misunderstanding.
confessions, I believe are often associated with individuals who are on the spectrum.
Who are vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I currently have a case with a young man with autism who had a seizure. His grandmother calls for an ambulance, but very often in our country, the cops come, they're first responders, or they will accompany an ambulance. And of course, the the charge that always happens with someone with mental illness ends up being obstruction. But that can be a felony charge. And of course, this kid comes out of his seizure and immediately wonders, who's this around me? And it just escalates. So the beauty is there are 5.5 million undiagnosed people with autism in our country, it is estimated. And they are having encounters with the police, they're having encounters with judges, and they're going to be problems. So I'm hoping this is a call to action for better training of the cops, better training of judges. You get a judge on a bad day and this person looks like they're just staring at you. They're not registering what you're, going off on them about. And I know we're about to get cut off here abruptly. I've been warned in a minute. I just want to thank all of you. I would love for you to read my book. If you do love it, please review it. Reviews are the mother's milk of publishing, I understand. And I've been very fortunate. I've got one star. And of course, my obsessive compulsive nature, I go track down who is that 1-star person? Well, they're in New York. Well, they're in New York.
They don't get it. Yeah.
So, well, no. I clicked to find out who their friends were. And all of their friends were from a 5-mile radius of where Virginia's family is from.
Oh, interesting.
Rossville, Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Wow.
And I thought, I feel like Alvin. I could start blaming everything on the Hickeys.
Exactly. It's hard not to sound paranoid after something like that. Wow.